Hi, I'm Grant Bartley. Let's suppose that a revolution for a sustainable global economy happens. For the sake of argument, let's suppose the ecological message that a lot of exasperated people are trying to sell gets seriously brought by the rest of the people. Let's fantasize that somehow revolutionary pro-ecological economic thinking spreads across the world, and that the world gets hold of this thinking, and that the global economy changes. Just then, just when we think we've got it sussed, just when we're sure that we're really evolving as an intelligent species, history will have something hard to say to us. Like many people, I think to make human life both maximally free and ecologically sustainable, the world needs a revolution in the production and distribution of resources. I've elsewhere painted a picture of one version of such an economy. There I argued for a two-zone economic ideal, where there's a free market, but also a self-sustaining social provision economy. But there could be another ideal involved in the ecological revolution. Most likely, any global sustainability revolution will be a mix of ideas, working their way to greater power and influence. Now I'd like us to dive deeper and consider problems with this upcoming eco-revolution, whatever it turns out to be, and through this to discover a deeper problem with human history itself. We might hope the governments of the world will finally come to preside over a socio-economic system dedicated to the realization of a relative paradise of peace and plenty for all, in which all humanity can develop together, well provisioned and unthreatened by war, famine, tyranny, or ecological instability. It's a fine fantasy, isn't it? We should instead rightly suspect that things will not be all good forever in the new garden. The fruit of the coming paradise will soon turn sour, as soon on eco-earth trouble begins to stir and hiss. Fast forward a few years from the revolution, and the perfect revolutionary scenario isn't working out so well. Let's intercept a podcaster reporting from the situation. He says, "It turns out that the price of organic milk and honey for all is that the human race is subject to the stratagems of a new aristocracy. The popular message slogans are merely a sunlit shade of green in contrast to the previous neon shades. We're stewards for the new earth is the sort of responsible catchphrase by which the people's media now defines reality. But gradually, more and more people began to realize that in creating paradise, we're creating a trap that's slowly closing in on us, as cracks in both experience and expectation begin to reveal the truth, that we're being mass greenwashed into a new, global, democratic, ecological servitude." At first, the leaders could simply ignore the marches for freedom as insignificant whining from the middle classes. At first, there wasn't any need for the psychotropic gas or the police stun charges. Then people start disappearing. Now, to more and more people, it's clear that if we don't act fast, the world will be sealed up in this soft totalitarian tyranny of a global aristocracy. For centuries, maybe. As a result, voices are murmuring louder and louder, whispering wise words around concrete ghettos. Fear for the future is blowing the word around the world like a slow tornado, whipping up the dust of dissatisfaction. A new revolution is gathering force. Many millions find themselves willing to take violent and rash resistance measures to regain their freedom of thought that the world is beginning to lose. Global leaders react against this rebellion, of course. All insurgency is crushed by an iron fist. First, the secret police closes in on the new revolutionary underground. They disappear millions around the world and capture most of the dissident leaders too. Revolution quashed. The name for this policy is cultural selection. One metaphor the government liked to use for its inquisition is keeping the garden in order to allow the flourishing of its beauty. As the global vice president herself put it in a speech, we all know that discipline is the only way the human race can survive what we'd otherwise do to ourselves. Or as a police spokesman said on a news clip while rounding up the counter-revolutionaries, the work of entrenching global society into global stability is harsh but necessary. After all, discipline is the price of eternal prosperity on a limited earth. I fantasize that humanity moves away from the insanity of our current cash grab consumerism, and we instead throw ourselves into the vision of an alternative world order of stability, provision, equality, and freedom. But what should we really imagine the future will be like after an eco-revolution? Through eco-revolutionary ideological manipulation, the fair new world becomes just another variation on the old systematic abuse of power by the powerful, which has been harming the masses forever. The parable illustrates a tragic core principle of human history. Suppose today's expansionist economics is replaced by some sort of sustainable economics, that human thinking and life starts going in a globally green direction. Who would argue that the future global ecological society won't itself go fundamentally wrong too? After all, revolutions have this glaring pattern of causing the revolutionized society to go wrong in unforeseen ways and not create the paradise it promised. The shadowy regime in the story is just this same pattern in a new setting with a new cast. So when we get to our Orwellian democratic eco-world, would we have progressed or just survived while giving ourselves new, perhaps deeper problems? Isn't it just too plausible that even as we redirect the global economic process towards long-term ecological sustainability and whatever else, the powers and their authorities will skillfully carve out a new self-justifying ideology of their power? By the time the new hierarchy is established, it's becoming too late to even be aware of our false ideal. The Metarevolution begins by seeing that the predicament I predicted, or almost any alternative future, illustrates a general malaise, a problem that all idealistic thinking can suffer from. We know things aren't going to work out how we idealistically want them to work in socially major ways. Imagine, for instance, that to achieve long-term ecological sustainability, some organization is going to run the world economy. With even all the best will in the world, that's a barrelful of potential problems, and we know there won't be the best will in the world, obviously. There's one extreme possibility of the future then. Suppose, as president of the global federal democracy, or whatever we call it, we get some disguised bloody Nero. I mean, imagine getting some crazy but subtle charismatic despot, a murderous but charming clinical sociopath, presiding over the earth. Whatever the specific problems will turn out to be, we know that things aren't going to work out the way we'd ideally want them to work out, even if we are allowed to implement our ideals, right? The root of this tragedy might be not really thinking through your ideals, having not enough information to make a good judgment, or it might be too simply believing the propaganda. We believe the media's saturated misrepresentation of things. We're evidently prone to being manipulated and exploited after all. To replace our contemporary ideological stupidities with a set of ecologically enhanced stupidities would be pretty stupid, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be like climbing scratched and bruised out of a crumbling mineshaft to fall off an adjacent cliff? I'm going to argue that this is a metaphor for all our possible futures if we don't learn to adapt our thinking to the truth about revolutions themselves. To starkly see the deep dilemma facing eco-revolutionaries and any other revolutionaries, let's briefly consider the Soviet Union, which anyone can point a finger at and say, well, this shows you how revolution really is. Let's start by suggesting that some of the major ideals of the Soviet Union were really desirable, which is presumably why the Russian people adopted them. I'm talking about such Marxist ideals as freedom of the masses from exploitation by the rich. Everyone does the work they're suited to by temperament, desire, education, and skill, in society where everyone has sufficient, even plenty. Let's suppose for a moment that these communist ideals are really desirable, right? Nevertheless, it didn't happen, did it? The Russian Revolution didn't work. The Russian Revolution just didn't form Russia into the ideals that justified the revolution. Revolution itself is questionable. It doesn't do what it promises to do. And if we haven't learnt from history to be at least cautious and skeptical when faced with deep change, then ruthless reality may still have to teach us a stone-hard lesson or two. We know things aren't going to work out the way we plan. What does this suspicion mean for how we should be thinking about social and cultural development? How we might best deal with it is in a meta-revolutionary manner. Any idealism has the potential to turn into a cancer of control. The undeniable evidence of history is that idealism is too easily corrupted. Too often, the new truth that will put things straight has too easily become just another excuse for the party to stamp the shiny jackboot of its authority, metaphorically or otherwise, on the faces of the dissenters and other unfortunates who got in the way. Things weren't always utopian in revolutionary China, for instance. In his wisdom, during the Cultural Revolution, Chairman Mao decided it was better for the sake of China and the communist cause for the party to decimate the population and the culture. Specifically, Mao thought it was a good idea to silence anyone caught within the confines of the Middle Empire showing any hint of non-approved intelligence. Unrestrained curiosity is just too dangerous. So teachers, free artists, writers, people with glasses, anybody the dumb orthodox bullies didn't like, were singled out and sentenced to rehabilitation, which in its extreme application meant rehabilitation from life. Mao was practically right about this in a morally wrong way. The natural human desire to examine and inevitably criticize powerful opinion is probably the greatest danger to the hierarchy of any established ideology. Someone might convince himself and others that there's something wrong with this and the conditions it justifies. Revolutionary rumblings arising from an epidemic of ideological questioning must be one of the greatest fears for any leader justified by any ideology, which means any leader. If the idea foundations of a ruler's power really are unsound, he's ruling an empire built on lies, isn't he? So though he may desperately try to hold together his house of cards, no campaign of murder can stop his palace of lies from falling. So a leader may panic when threatened by the universal force of human curiosity, as happened at many similar junctures in history. I mean, I'm a Christian, but look at the history of Christianity, a religion that's founded on an ideal of love. The bloody narrative of the international body of Christ provides graphic examples of how far ideals can be twisted, it's fair to say, unfortunately. Apparently, though, any fresh-faced idealism can be twisted into a monstrous authoritarianism or abused in some other nasty way. So perhaps the hair at the back of our necks should stand up in a chill when we hear someone shout, "A new world now!" Who wants their door to be kicked in the middle of the night, to be dragged away from their family by a brutal mob or the secret police, or whatever mask the modern witch hunt wears? One major thing to fear about idealistic revolution is coming to find out that we're now in the grip of someone's control. This is what went wrong in our eco-parable, for instance. Despotism seems to follow the fire of radical revolutionary thought like an icy shadow, doesn't it? The fear is of the narrowing and ultimate closing of our horizons of thought forever, like prison doors shutting eternally. Let me ask a dumb question. What is it about totalitarianism or other forms of thought and life control that's so despicable? Well, in a Darwinian framework, for instance, freedom is an extension of the natural impulse to try to survive. You need freedom to think and act because you can't trust other people to look after your interests as much as you can trust yourself to do so, generally speaking. I also think people distrust radical or idealistic thinking because they fear the violent spectre of extremism, which follow the really hard political paradigm shifts. Such things historically frequently follow in the wake of revolution. As history loudly proclaims, quite apart from totalitarianism, we've done a lot of other wrongs from the influence of our ideologies, our basic ways of thinking about the world. Indeed, bad ideas plausibly instigate and justify most of the greed, imperialism, slavery and exploitation humanity has spent a lot of its history and intellects rationalizing. There are so many examples illustrating what we do when we become too certain of our ideals. I've already mentioned Christian history, which is replete with sectarian wars and the missionary-led slaughter of pagans. But there have been just as many non-religious humanitarian social perversions, including war, despotism, and ethnic cleansing. History offers diverse evidence that any type of basic thinking, religious or non-religious, can fire up its sincere acolytes into unchained frenzies of destruction. Zealousness is good when it leads to people actually doing some good. But trouble swiftly comes from the zealots of any belief system when the heretics, meaning anybody who doesn't comply, presents obstacles blocking the path to heaven or the other paradise thereafter. Finally, the self-assumed keepers of the truth come to see that to achieve their ideals, they must silence the ignorant from their interference. Ideological pathologies are perhaps most clearly revealed in revolutions, because after a revolutionary purge, a new ideal can be applied most purely, as it were, unhindered by anything else. So, with the benefit of history, we now know that revolution means another opportunity for people to dominate or kill other people, ironically by some rationalization of tackling those same people's frustrations. But really, political revolution, like many brands of ideological fervour, is another brutal struggle for power under the banner of high ideals. So people don't fear revolutionary change because they fear things might change for the better. Only the people who hold the strings of power fear that sort of change. These strings make you and me dance our lives away to radically bad ideals, by the way. At any given moment in history, the powerful have a vested interest in keeping the order of things as it is, right? But here, I'm not talking about the fears of the powerful. I'm talking about ordinary people fearing the potential problems in radical revolutions, even when those revisions are necessary. The popular mood seems to agree with me that whatever new ideal of progress is pursued, something big's going to go wrong with it, probably quite soon. Perhaps you suspect that society's dreams always turn sour in the end, that we always manage to foul it all up. We've made the mistake of being over-optimistic, idealistic even, about our idealism too many times. I think this is principally why the liberal West now has a very conservative dismissal of social-scale revolutionary idealism. Unfortunately, in practice, this anti-radical idealism ideal begets a repulsion for socially and economically challenging thoughts, despite the fact that the consumerist expansionism we're almost globally saturated with is highly dysfunctional false idealism. The evil of politics, and especially of revolutionary politics, is common knowledge, I dare say. Your own knowledge of history will tell you how capable people with power are of misusing what's been placed in their hands. So we feel that we must always plug up any mental hole potential revolution is threatening to explosively emerge from, in case it twists into totalitarianism or social collapse, gangsterism, so on and so on. Neither do we want to deny that once the dust settles over the new world, nothing will have fundamentally changed. The regrettable truth is that however the form of the society or the economy changes, people will still be under the sway of a selfish establishment and a socially dominant worldview. Even with ideals for transforming the world which seem clear, clean and uncomplicated, we suspect that these good ideas for deep change will become excuses to corrupt and waste lives. This is how it always seems to be. In historic practice, revolution or progress seems to too often mean that a new generation will be deprived, abused, perhaps killed, so that a new batch of psychopathic egotists can exercise over-controlling power, albeit now in a slightly different setting, with a different excuse, on holding different guns. So now, revolutionary pessimism is a widespread assumption. We say to ourselves that the chronic corruption and abuse of human ideals means that there's no real progress, except technologicalization. Since, although we may to a degree change the shape of society, the human condition remains the same, just because human beings remain essentially the same. So, why should anyone stick their neck out to try and change things? It should not be surprising then that Western culture is now a bit jaded about revolution. Guess who's going to be left at the wrong end of the power structure, stooping low under the weight of its demands? Guess who's going to be left looking down the wrong end of those guns? You and me, buddy. The ideals generated in any ideological vision can easily become destructive, one way or another. Any of our ideals could go wrong in significant ways. Any guiding thinking can be used to guide us down dead ends, we might say. However, humanity having endured the 20th century, the idea of progress has been tainted forever with the blood that's spilt through human ideals. So we might now have actually learnt something from history, that whenever a group uses a theory which says how we must live, it's liable to go significantly wrong somewhere. It's the same story throughout space and time. Whatever happens, human nature is going to get in the way of human progress somehow. An important caution is evidently extractable from the story. Let me put it like this. Any ideology which directs human behaviour can potentially have negative influences on that behaviour. So the evidence of history yields the first meta-revolutionary principle of history, which is that, however justified our initial ideals, something significant's going to go wrong in their implementations if it's continued indefinitely. Let's break it down a little. First, it seems that the potential for historically or socially significant error applies to any type of thinking that affects society. Religious, political, economic, scientific, everyday common sense, and perhaps anything else you can think of. It's also true that the problem of significant lurking error could be active at any level of thought, from basic and widespread ideas and behaviours to sophisticated rare thinking. Put these ideas together and we can say that any of our ideas can go wrong at any levels of any beliefs, ideals, and their applications. This makes the fallibility of our thinking a universal problem. History tells us that something's likely to go wrong with any ideology. Suspicion of this fact is, I think, what makes us so conservative, cautious, and reactionary, even as our messed up world heads for a sky-high fall of its own. So where's our future now? What are we to do? Or, as we could ask, why should we want to go through the same cycle of revolutionary change again and again, just to again get the same results, even if they're dressed up in new uniforms? It all too quickly becomes just another excuse for a brainwash. On the other hand, we clearly now need some sort of deep economic and social revolution. For overwhelmingly practical reasons, we need to radically evolve global society. If we're going to use our intelligence, we're not going to continue to ignore the unpleasant and growing truth about our economic processes because we can't face the mass responsibility. But we're already starting to feel the hard implications of our lifestyle on our lives. So I'm repeating what many horse prophets keep on saying, which is that the human race must deeply change its way of doing business. Anyway, we owe the truth to ourselves, so if nothing else, it's a matter of integrity. Shall I dishonour your intelligence then, by claiming that this time the results of our revolutionary agenda will be different? Why shouldn't our eco-idealism follow the same historical pattern and go badly wrong in historically established ways? Historical evidence and rational foresight agree. Inevitably, whatever ideals we apply, the ideals will be found wanting. See, even if we do manage anything like a pro-ecological economic revolution, it'll be a case of our learning to live in a different sort of popular deception, or some other political disaster either waiting to happen or happening. This contradiction between what we need to happen and therefore do, and the sort of results we anticipate from our actions, creates a conundrum, clearly. Any sort of revolution will probably fail us badly, but we still need revolution. I call this the paradox of revolution. We need radical change. Our world is being processed by the present industrial complex into too bad a state for us to leave the process as it is. However, history tells us how bad applied political scale idealism turns out. And who knows what unknown evil spirits may be lurking inside global eco-revolutionary's black box, waiting to burst free. We know about this dangerous potential even before we take the next big ideological step on the long road. So perhaps it's better for us to stay in our present dying process. It's better to stay stuck in our fast-sliding avalanche to global collapse than risk the terrors of a global bloodbath, isn't it? So what are we going to do? Are we going to stand still while things crescendo up and grind down? Will we be lion-hearted revolutionaries and try to change the world somehow? Even though we know that our ideals are going to go radically wrong, utilizing the worst facets of human nature, with some mix of prejudice, complacency, fear, brutality, dim-wittedness, and any other negative attributes we can find to bung into the cauldron. We still need to be able to continually develop, right, socially, even developing our ideals. So, what can we do about the revolutionary paradox? Is there any way we can prevent the implementation of our ideals from going disastrously wrong? The coming acid rain clouds of the future's global challenges will bring armies of fundamental change with them, one way or another. So what's the right way to turn at this crossroads in the wilderness? Quick now, the clouds are fast gathering above our heads. I don't think you're going to like the pathway I suggest. The journey I'm going to recommend has to take us into the heart of uncertainty in order to pull us out safely on the other side. But to see this, we're first going to have to consider how historical change works. And that's what the next video will be about.